The rain fell in punishing sheets over the alleyways of Greyford, a weary, forgotten town cradled by cold, indifferent hills. The kind of place where wind howls through broken shutters and no one looks out their windows after dark. That night, the rain didn't just fall, it assaulted. It seemed to grieve. It was the kind of storm that washed away footprints and, with them, memories that were too painful to keep. In the narrow backside of town, behind a derelict K-9 training facility where cruelty wore the mask of discipline, something stirred, or rather, shivered. Beneath a rusted dumpster, barely visible in the flickering streetlight, lay a creature so small, so still, that he barely registered as alive. More shadow than form, more fear than flesh. His name, if you could call it that, was Bran, etched faintly on a corroded metal tag that dangled from a too-tight collar. Not a name given with love, but scribbled in indifference. To the trainers behind those chain-link fences and peeling paint, he was nothing but that useless mutt. Too small to intimidate, too slow to obey, too stupid to mold. Every time he failed to respond to a barked command, punishment came like clockwork. A boot. A slap. A curse spat like venom. His instincts, still half-formed in that young, confused brain, were seen as defiance. His flinches were offenses. And each blow etched the same message deeper into his bones: you are wrong for existing. Bran never barked. Never whimpered for help. He just folded. His body curled in tighter each day, shrinking into itself like a paper burned at the edges. His once fluffy coat was now matted with rain and blood, clinging to protruding ribs like frost-bitten ivy. On this night, this storm-soaked night, even his tears had dried up. There was nothing left to shed. Nothing left to hope. Imagine if your first lessons in life were not love or play, but pain. Imagine learning the sound of footsteps not as something joyful, but as a signal to brace for hurt. But then, footsteps did come. Deliberate. Heavy. Unhurried. Echoing through the alley like a slow drumbeat of fate. The boots belonged to Cal Riven, a stoic fire marshal in Greyford, once a commander in the elite K-9 rescue division during the long, bitter Arcton conflict. He'd seen devastation in many forms: burning buildings, collapsed homes, shattered soldiers. But nothing prepared him for the sight that awaited him under that dumpster. His flashlight caught Bran's eyes, two wide orbs of liquid terror, too hollow for a creature that young. "Easy now, little warrior." Cal's voice was low, like the hush of someone trying not to wake a ghost. Rain slid down his coat, soaking him to the skin, but he didn't flinch. He knelt, making himself smaller, unthreatening. "I'm not here to hurt you." Bran didn't react. Couldn't. His muscles were locked with fear. His breathing so shallow it barely disturbed the air. Cal stayed silent. No commands. No whistles. Just presence. He extended a hand, palm up, fingers open, not to grab, but to offer. A gesture rarely seen in Bran's world. Minutes passed. Rain dripped from the edge of Cal's hat. Somewhere in the distance, a train moaned. Then a flicker. Bran's eyes twitched. Then his head, ever so slightly. And slowly, like a soul crawling back into a body, he inched forward. His nose quivered. When his nose finally touched Cal's hand, just the barest brush, it was like watching a dam crack after years of pressure. Bran collapsed, not out of pain, but relief. His body sagged into the pavement, a whimper breaking from deep inside him, soft and soaked in sorrow. A sound he didn't know he still had in him. Cal gathered him gently, wrapping him in the heavy fire jacket that still smelled faintly of smoke and cedarwood. He held him close, shielding him from the rain. "You're not broken, Bran," he whispered into the soaked fur. "Just bruised. And I'll prove it to you." By morning, Bran lay curled like a comma by the flickering fireplace in Cal's modest cabin, nestled at the outskirts of Greyford where the pine trees thinned and the silence was kinder. The room was a quiet museum of past glories, framed medals dulled by time, faded photographs of proud dogs mid-leap or nestled against soot-covered firefighters, their tongues lolling out in joy or duty. They watched over the room like silent sentinels, bearing witness now to a very different kind of courage, a small, broken pup learning how to exist again. Bran didn't move. Not even to breathe deeply. His tiny chest rose and fell with the whisper of a ghost. He hadn't touched the water bowl. Hadn't sniffed the blanket. Hadn't uttered a single sound. Cal, seated across the room in a worn armchair, watched him with the stillness of someone who had waited for flames to crawl through walls. His voice, low and steady, finally broke the hush. "Healing isn't a rescue," he murmured. "It's a promise you have to make every day." Think about that. We often romanticize the idea of rescue, like it's a dramatic, one-time act that solves everything. But the truth? Rescue is the easy part. It's what comes after, the daily work of trust building, of showing up when no one else ever did, that makes the difference. Bran flinched at even the smallest sound, the clink of a coffee cup, the creak of a floorboard. Every crevice of the house felt like it might hide the next horror. His eyes, wide and glassy, often darted to the door, expecting something bad to come through it. Trauma has a way of rewiring survival. Even a safe room can feel like a cage when memory is louder than the present. But Cal didn't raise his voice. Didn't clap or coax. He understood the rule most forget. You don't teach a wounded creature to trust by shouting safety at it. You show it, over and over, with your silence, your stillness, your staying. Later that day, Cal walked into the room carrying two simple things, a shallow bowl of warm chicken broth, and a rubber chew toy shaped like a fire hydrant. He placed them on the floor gently, a few feet from Bran, and then stepped away, resisting the human urge to push. For hours, nothing happened. Bran's eyes stayed fixed on the wooden floor, his limbs tucked tightly under his frame like a crumpled letter never meant to be opened. The sun dipped lower, golden light spilling across the cabin. And then, a small miracle. A trembling paw. Just one. Slowly, hesitantly, it reached out and brushed the edge of the toy. He didn't gnaw it. He didn't toss it around. He simply touched it, like a child testing the warmth of a stove that once burned him. As if asking, is this real? Is this mine? Am I allowed to want this? That night, Cal didn't speak of it. He just smiled faintly and let the moment settle. The next morning, he gently clipped a soft leash onto Bran's new collar, a small act of progress. But the instant Bran felt the tension of the leash, he collapsed. Flat against the hardwood, legs splayed, body stiff. Not from defiance, but from memory. To Bran, the leash was not a symbol of guidance, but a whip in waiting. It represented pain, control, submission. So often we forget, tools of care, in the wrong hands, become weapons. But Cal didn't tug. He didn't plead. He simply sat on the floor beside Bran and waited, an hour of silence, reassurance, and whispered promises. And finally, slow as the breaking of winter, Bran stood. When they stepped outside, Bran's paws touched grass for what felt like the first time in his life. He paused, nose twitching in the breeze, eyes squinting against the newness of open sky. The wind carried the earthy scent of pine and soil, unfamiliar, but not unkind. His ears twitched. His head lifted. And his tail, just barely, flicked. A beginning. Not the kind you find in books with happy endings, but the kind that matters most, fragile, unsteady, and real. One afternoon, the peace shattered. A sudden bang, sharp and metallic, ripped through the air from a nearby construction site. Metal. Loud. Sudden. The kind of sound that turns ordinary people's heads with annoyance, but for Bran, it was a gunshot from the past. He didn't bark. Didn't run. He collapsed. Dropped instantly to the ground like a soldier caught in crossfire. His body flattened, tail tucked so tight it disappeared, paws desperately covering his face, as if they could block out a memory now screaming louder than the present. That sound wasn't just noise, it was a time machine, hurling him backward into a place of punishment, where noise was a prelude to pain. Trauma doesn't ask permission to return. It doesn't care if the sky is clear or if you thought you were past it. One echo, one trigger, and suddenly you're back in the dark, even if you're standing in the sun. Cal saw him fall and didn't hesitate. He dropped to his knees in the grass, wrapping his arms around Bran's shaking frame. His voice was soft, low, almost like a lullaby. "You're here. You're safe. This isn't then." Such simple words. But in that moment, they were everything. Because here's the truth few talk about. Healing isn't linear. It's not a ladder you climb, rung by rung. It's more like a dance between progress and panic, hope and old habits. And sometimes, despite all the steps forward, one sound can undo hours, even days, of trust. That night, the fear lingered. Bran whimpered softly when Cal tried to leave the room. Not loud, just a thin, pleading sound that wrapped around Cal's heart like a vine. So, without hesitation, Cal dragged a pillow from the bedroom and laid it on the living room floor beside Bran's blanket. He didn't lecture. He didn't coax Bran to be brave. He simply showed up. Again. Because presence is sometimes more powerful than words. In the quiet glow of a single lamp, the room thick with stillness, something sacred unfolded. Inch by inch, Bran crept forward. Not rushed. Not pushed. Just moved by the magnet of safety. Until finally, his small head rested against Cal's chest. His ear pressed close, comforted by the steady rhythm of a human heartbeat that whispered, "You're not alone anymore." It wasn't just a cuddle. It was a covenant. A silent agreement between brokenness and belonging. And in that moment, it became unmistakably clear. Healing would take more than love. Love could open the door, but help would be needed to walk through it. Whether it's a dog, a person, or a wounded past, we sometimes need more than kindness. We need structure, expertise, patience. And above all, we need to understand that setbacks don't erase progress. They're part of it. So if you've ever felt like you've failed because you got triggered or took a step back, remember, even heroes shake. Even the brave fall. The real courage is in rising again, especially when someone's waiting for you with an open heart and a pillow on the floor. When Cal realized love alone might not be enough, he picked up the phone and called someone who knew what it meant to untangle trauma strand by strand. Marla Theron. A retired field trainer and trauma rehabilitation specialist, Marla had spent decades working with both animals and soldiers whose scars didn't always show. She now ran Rivers Ridge, a healing sanctuary on the outskirts of Greyford, where the land rolled gently like an exhale and the air smelled of pine, lavender, and second chances. It wasn't a clinic. It was a haven. There were no harsh barks, no chain-link fences, no forceful hands. Only open space, patient voices, and routines built not to correct, but to comfort. Bran began to mend there, not all at once, but like frost melting under spring light. He was guided gently by Marla's seasoned hands and held steady by Cal's unwavering presence, the man who had become his anchor in a sea that once tossed him like driftwood. And then came the trust test, a simple idea, but a monumental challenge. Bran was placed in the center of a large, enclosed field. No distractions. No walls to lean against. Just open space, something that, ironically, can feel more threatening than confinement when your fear tells you you're safe or small. Cal stood at the far end of the field. Arms open. Knees slightly bent. Eyes steady. "Come on, Bran," he called, his voice soft as memory. "You're strong enough." Imagine that moment, not just as a dog in a field, but as a metaphor for any one of us who's ever tried to move forward after being hurt. You see someone you trust. You want to get to them. But the space in between feels like a minefield of triggers. Bran stood still, paws trembling. Then a step. Then another. But just halfway across the field, a sharp crack echoed from the nearby road. A car backfiring. To anyone else, just noise. But to Bran? It was a ghost. A flash of remembered violence. He dropped instantly. Flat into the earth as if it might swallow him whole. His body rigid. His mind hijacked by a past that refused to loosen its grip. And then, nothing. Just silence and wind. No punishment. No pain. Only Cal's voice, from across the distance. "You're not that broken pup anymore." He didn't rush to rescue Bran. Didn't shatter the silence by closing the distance. Instead, he gave Bran the dignity of choice, a gift few wounded souls ever receive. And something shifted. Bran's head lifted first, ears still tight, but alert. His eyes locked on Cal's. And for a moment, the field between them was more than grass. It was a battlefield of memory. But Bran, fragile, shaky, and still healing, stood. He shook once, as if shedding the fear like loose fur. Then he walked. One step. Then another. Until the last few steps became a run. And when he collapsed into Cal's arms at the end of the field, it wasn't just relief. It was a triumph. Because true strength isn't the absence of fear, it's the will to move forward in spite of it. And on that day, in a quiet corner of Greyford where the hills whispered hope, a once broken pup took his place among the warriors, not with a growl, but with a step. Weeks had passed since Bran crossed that field at River's Ridge, his first true battle won. The quiet in Cal's cabin had taken on a new shape, less like the silence of grief and more like the hush of calm. There was routine now. Trust. Even play. Then, one late afternoon, the phone rang. It was Greyford's emergency response unit. A child, 7 years old, had gone missing in the wooded foothills just outside town. Dense terrain, unpredictable weather. Hours mattered. Minutes even. Cal stood frozen for a moment, the phone still warm against his ear. It had been years since his last mission. Years since he'd heard that kind of call in a voice that tried to sound professional but trembled beneath the urgency. The kind of tremble every first responder knows by heart. The weight of hope thinning into desperation. His hand hovered near the old field bag. Then he looked up. Bran stood at the door. Alert. Ears forward. Tail wagging, not in play, but in purpose. Like he knew. As if some ember in him, the one that had once been nearly extinguished, was burning bright again. And in that moment, Cal realized something vital. Bran wasn't the only one who had needed saving. He reached for the harness. The forest was thick with shadows, tangled branches clawing at their clothes and fur. Twigs snapped underfoot. Somewhere in the distance, the voice of another search team echoed briefly and then faded into the trees. But Bran wasn't distracted. His nose dipped low. His body stilled. And then, a sharp bark, short and focused. He took off, pulling Cal down a narrow ravine trail barely visible under the dense canopy. Cal followed, adrenaline rising, but not from fear. From hope. Then a sound. Not an animal. Not the wind. A sob. Faint. Wet with terror. They pushed past the underbrush. And there, crumpled beneath the roots of a fallen cedar, his clothes torn, face streaked with dirt and tears, was the boy. He wasn't just lost. He was holding on by a thread. Bran didn't hesitate. He trotted down the slope, slowly, deliberately. No sudden movements. No barking. Just presence, warm, safe, calm. He nestled beside the child, wrapping his body around him like a living blanket. The boy reached out with trembling fingers and clung to Bran's neck, burying his face in the dog's fur. "You found him," he whispered. And that was when the tears came, not from the child, but from Cal, watching this small, once broken creature become the very thing he had needed all his life, someone who showed up. That night back home, the house was quiet once more. But this time it was sacred. The kind of quiet that follows a miracle. Cal sat beside Bran on the rug, the fire throwing soft shadows across the walls. He ran his hand down Bran's back, feeling the strength in the muscle and the calm in his breath. "You saved that boy," Cal whispered. Then after a pause, his voice rough with truth. "And you saved me too. Because sometimes, redemption doesn't come through recovery, it comes through purpose." And the most extraordinary part? Bran, the dog once discarded as worthless, had become someone's lifeline. Imagine if we judged less by where someone begins, and more by who they're brave enough to become. A few quiet weeks passed, filled with long walks, slow mornings, and the kind of peace that only comes after a storm has moved through. Then one afternoon the phone rang. It was Marla. "We're holding a public demonstration next weekend," she said, her tone light but purposeful. "Rehabilitated dogs. Survivors. Fighters. You and Bran in?" Cal paused, glancing over at Bran, who was dozing in the sun-drenched corner of the living room, a chew toy tucked under his paw like a child's teddy bear. The idea wasn't about competition. It wasn't about ribbons or trophies. It was about visibility. About giving survivors a stage to show the world not what had broken them, but how far they'd come. So they said yes. The town's central green was alive with color and sound. Booths lined the grass, children ran laughing between hay bales and balloon arches, and the loudspeaker crackled every few minutes with announcements that boomed through the warm afternoon air. For Bran, it might as well have been a battlefield of old ghosts. He tensed the moment they approached the demonstration ring. His ears twitched. His legs locked in place for half a second. Crowds. Noise. Unfamiliar smells. It was everything his trauma had once taught him to fear. But here's the thing about healing. It doesn't mean the fear disappears. It means you learn to walk through it anyway. And that's exactly what Bran did. He stepped forward. Not confidently. Not like a show dog raised on applause. But with something better, courage carved from survival. Inside the ring, the course awaited, small hurdles, weaving poles, sound obstacles, and mock rescue simulations. Bran approached each one like a soldier returning to old terrain. His movements were cautious, calculated, but steady. And at every pause, every moment where the past threatened to pull him under, Cal was there. Just a quiet voice. A calming presence. A reminder. And then the real test came. From hidden speakers, a series of thunder sounds erupted, sharp, sudden, rolling across the field like war drums. For a moment Bran froze, muscles taut, eyes wide. It was the sound that had once driven him into the dirt, that had made him believe punishment was coming. But this time, something different happened. Cal knelt beside the ring's boundary and said softly but firmly, "Look at me." Bran did. That's not who you are anymore. It was a statement. A truth. A mirror being held up to Bran, not reflecting his past, but his becoming. Bran blinked, shook once. And then, he walked on. Not rushed. Not proud. Just steady. Strong. The crowd erupted. Cheering. Clapping. Some wiping tears they weren't expecting to shed at a dog show. But Bran didn't look at them. He only looked at Cal. Because he hadn't come for a medal. He hadn't come for the crowd. He had come to finish something he'd started the moment he crawled out from under that dumpster months ago. And he didn't just finish the course. He conquered it. By the time summer unfurled its golden warmth over Greyford, Bran was no longer the broken pup. He was something else entirely. He had become a symbol, not just of survival, but of transformation. Of what can happen when someone refuses to give up on a life others had already written off. Children in schools knew his name. His visits were the highlight of classroom days, where he'd sit quietly as teachers spoke about kindness and resilience. Kids would line up just to lay a hand on his soft coat, whispering secrets into his fur like he was a living diary of hope. At the local hospital, he patted gently down sterile halls. No barks. No leaps. Just quiet grace. Nurses said even the most withdrawn patients would reach out when Bran passed. For some, he was the only one they allowed to touch them. And in therapy groups for veterans, men and women carrying invisible wounds, Bran sat beside them, his head on their boots, his breath steady and grounding. He didn't need to say anything. He just understood. One afternoon, as light filtered through Cal's kitchen window, the phone rang. A representative from the mayor's office. Bran had been nominated, and selected, as Greyford's Hero of the Year. It was an honor typically reserved for humans. Firefighters, teachers, doctors. People who ran into burning buildings or changed lives from behind desks. But this year, the town made an exception. Because this year, a dog had done all those things, and more. The ceremony took place in the town square under a wide blue sky. A makeshift stage had been set up beside the war memorial. Families filled the lawn. Veterans in uniforms stood at quiet attention. News cameras framed the moment, but everyone watched the dog. When the mayor finally announced Bran's name, the crowd stood, not with cheers, but with reverence. Cal, holding the leash in one hand and the plaque in the other, felt his vision blur. The years of loss. The guilt after retiring. The hollow stretch of days that had followed. They all seemed so far away now. Then Bran stepped forward, calm and composed, chest slightly puffed, eyes alert. And just before the applause could rise again, he barked. Once. Clear. Confident. Proud. Not a cry for help. Not a sound of defiance. A declaration. I am not what was done to me. I am what I chose to become. That night, as cicadas sang in the tall grass and the air turned cool against the porch railings, Cal sat with Bran curled at his feet, the medal still dangling from his collar. He looked down, eyes heavy but full. You saved me, Bran. You reminded me how to live. And Bran, with a soft thump of his tail against Cal's boot, seemed to say you too. Because while everyone saw Bran as the hero, Cal knew the truth. They had saved each other. Not through grand acts, but through showing up. Again and again. Through patience. Through presence. That is the real legacy of the brave, not fame, not plaques, but the quiet transformation of pain into purpose. If this story of resilience touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Share Bran's story with someone who believes in second chances, and help us shine a light on the silent heroes all around us.